I'm just waiting for notification of this to appear on the screen. Okay, the meeting is now recording, so I will take the sederant for the Financial Resources Scrutiny Forum on Thursday the 9th of December 2021. I can see that we have present Councillor Brogan. Do we have Councillor Buchanan? No. I have apologies from Councillor Kalikes. I can see that we have Councillor Donnelly, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Holford. Do we have Councillor Lennon? No. I can see that we have Councillor McAdams and Councillor Wark. And officers present today are Jackie Taylor, Lorena Hagan, Derek Craig and myself, Carol Lyon. I'll hand back to yourself, Chair.
Thanks very much. Okay, so I'll just start off by asking, is there a declaration of any interest, please? No? Okay, excellent. Okay, I'll just move on to item number 2 then. So this is minutes of the previous meeting. This is on pages 3 to pages 6. So this was the minutes to be agreed from the 11th of November's meeting. I'm just going to move to pass the minutes unless there's any questions. Okay, can I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Grant. Okay, I'll just move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is item 3A. So this is the capital budget monitoring. So this is the 2021-2022, and this is for the general fund capital programme. It's on pages 7 to 28, and Jackie will take us through.
Thanks, Chair. So as Chair's explained, this is the capital paper for General Fund. It's taking us up to the 8th of October 2021. Section 4 of the report on page 7 covers the main summary of our capital programme for the year. We have a budget of £78.3 million. That includes some adjustments to the programme that were approved at the Executive Committee last week. And when we come to the appendices, I can cover them in more detail. Those adjustments total £5.2 million. And at paragraph 4.2, we explain that is partly due to the impact of market conditions, availability of resources and price increases, and the impact of COVID-19. Because some of these issues may continue into the future, particularly in market conditions, it could be the case that further slippage is to be expected this year. At paragraph 4.4 on page 8, just at the top there, we report for the period that we're talking about just now to the 8th of October, we have spent £26.3 million. If I move on to the appendices, firstly on page 10, we have Appendix A, and this shows all the adjustments that were approved at the Executive Committee last week. There's a number there, which I'm sure you've read through, and they total £5.1 million. There are a few areas where we've received additional funding, and they're noted in there for you. But as reported earlier, the majority is moving monies into next financial year to complete projects. Appendix B on page 12 is a summary of our capital programme over resources, and that totals £78.3 million. And then following on from that, on page 13, we have Appendix C, which breaks the programme down over services rather than resources. So you can see all of the services on the left-hand side of that table and the actual spend on the right-hand side of that table for your information. As we move on to Appendix D on page 14, this reports how the capital programme is funded this year. And the majority of the funding for the programme, as I've reported before, comes from borrowing and from a capital grant from the Scottish Government. On page 15, we start to report on the physical progress of projects, and Derek will take us through those.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, build executive summary then on page 15, Appendix E. We are looking at period 7, and there were 3 projects reported as behind programme. And if we go over the page, page 16, there's an explanation for each of those. That's the first one is Skylark Nursery Expansion at Robert Smiley, and we've experienced delays in material shortages, and also then St Mark's Primary School in Hamilton, a nursery and classroom expansion. We've also been hampered by the delivery date for steel being later than we had envisaged. And also at Newton Farm Primary School, we've had the same sort of issue with the steel delivery date, and we're about 3 weeks behind the original programme there as well. Moving over the page to the non-build executive summary. On page 17, there's also one project behind there. And if we move to page 19, it's listed as Abington Campus for Enterprise. Again, the project's behind due to issues in procuring materials with a longer delivery time than normal. Moving over the page to the Roads Executive Summary, Appendix G on page 20. There's also a project listed as behind programme there, and over the page on page 21, it notes it's the City Deal project at Green Hills Straven Road. Again, project delayed due to COVID-19 and issues experienced with the supply of materials. Chair.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Jackie. Thank you very much, Derek. Okay, I'll just open up for questions, and I can see I've got two already. Mary, do you want to go first?
Okay, it was just to make comment on St Mark's. That's obviously in my area, and I'm very close to St Mark's. In fact, I was up at the school just the other day there, and I did ask a question to the officer, I think it was. I sent a question up the email to say, could he advise me how, when the deadline's going to be for St Mark's, because it has had an impact. The kids have to watch the playground. Parking for parents can't take place at the moment the way that it did. So there's been quite an upheaval there for St Mark's users, and it was just to be mindful of that. And if you can tell me when the project's going to complete, because we've still got the 2 nursery classrooms as well to come on board there too. But they're built, that's going to happen with inside the school. So
Chair, Chair, I can answer that if I'm hearing Councillor Donnelly correct. I think we are due to finish in June next year, and we are making every effort we can to make sure that that's still achievable. It will certainly be in place for the new term in August. I hope that's helpful, Councillor.
Yeah, it is. I'll feed that back.
Can I just check something? Is that okay? See, when you say for June, does that mean it's then back on schedule? Or was it always going to complete in June? It's just behind just now? Or?
We would probably say it was probably going to be a little earlier than that. So it is probably delayed.
Mm-hmm.
The end date was probably going to be end of April, beginning of May. Yeah. So we're moving it out slightly because we have had about 6 weeks of waiting for steel. But we'll try to recover that as much as possible. It'll obviously depend on weather and other things as well, not having any further shortages or delays.
No problems at all. Thank you very much for clarifying that. On you go, Mary. On you go.
Chair, just is there any reason why why steel's been delayed? Is there a reason for that?
Mary, it's because of the pandemic.
It is actually about supply and demand.
Steel's been affected in timber.
Been a huge demand for steel, and there's not enough in the country, basically. So we've had to take a lot longer to get things than we would normally have waited for.
So is that down to the pandemic alone or anything else? That's the point.
That'd be a number of other factors, I would say.
Right. That's what I thought. Okay.
Did I tell Mary the wrong information there?
That was just one factor.
Right, okay, that's fine. Just so that I'm not putting you in the wrong steer, then that would make me a rubbish chair. Right, okay, that's fine. That was actually because of a previous conversation we've had, but that's okay. Eric, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to pretend not to be being overly parochial, but the truth is I'm interested in Abington and also one of my bridges. I'm just wondering where we're going with both the shortages of materials and potential shortages of manpower and specialist services and so forth. There all seems to be an awful lot of pressure and has been for a while. Do we have any idea of where these things are going that are anything more clear than gazing into a crystal ball and hoping? Have we got any real idea of how the progress is going and when we might be able to sort of swing things back into a normal schedule?
Okay, first of all, I'll say it's page 19 for anybody. That's what the Abington campus is on. Derek, I'll hand it over to you.
In general terms, Councillor Halford, I would say that we don't know when it's going to end. However, as demand starts to even out, we're assuming that supply will catch up, and therefore brick material shortages will be overtaken by stock holdings. That's certainly been an indication from the wider construction supply chain. In terms of, we are just having to wait a little longer for things, basically allowing supply to catch up. It's not like we're never going to get the shortages. They're not. We are actually looking at alternative materials and stuff like that as well to see if there's anything else in the market that would substitute for what we were originally looking for. So there's a few things that we're doing to try and mitigate some of those delays. But as to when that might end and supply will return to normal, I'm afraid that's not clear yet to the wider construction market.
Yeah, I'm slightly concerned, and I don't want to be specific, and I don't expect you to give us an answer to a specific thing. But the issue that I'm seeing at the Clyde Bridge, we had the tenders in September, I think, and we were hoping it would be 4 to 6 weeks, and then we would have an accepted tender, and we'd know where we are. Well, we're now almost at the end of the year, and that tendering process is being held up. Now, I don't know specifically why, and I wouldn't expect you to comment on the specifics of that case, even if you are privy to them. But it does seem to me slightly worrying that either we or suppliers are unable to commit to times and schedules and facts and figures, and we could see sort of open-ended issues here, and I'm just wondering whether there's any light at the end of the tunnel or whether it's just a case of hold on and hope.
We basically are dealing with each job on a job-by-job basis. I know certainly I've got a few projects where we're trying to get suppliers to confirm fixed prices to allow us to engage with them and make sure that we commit to putting the orders in place. And they're finding that really difficult through their supply chain, through their subcontractors and such like, to be able to provide us with the fixed price period that we need in order to accept contracts.
Derek, can I ask a question based on what Eric was actually mentioning? It's also going back to Mary to do with the steel. So the steel is there, it's just logistically we're having difficulty getting the steel from one point to another point, or are we not using British steel? Are we using steel from, say, China?
Probably the latter. I don't know exactly where it comes from, but it is to do with, the demand has increased so much at this time, after having had a shutdown period, that they're having to bring things from elsewhere. So it's the logistics of getting that into the country and getting it distributed around the country that's obviously adding to the pressure.
And is that something we need to look at procurement-wise? Because I'm just thinking, there's steel yards in Motherwell, that's a stone's throw away. Would it not make sure
it doesn't make that type? It doesn't make that type of steel frame stuff. It's sheet metal. Right.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's something you have learned. Sure, everybody else has. So that's good.
There's steel and then there's steel. Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's Blue Steel, but that's Zoolander, and that's a whole different movie. So, I'll move on to you, Walter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to comment on the steel. We no longer make the right steel in this country. So we've sold the crown jewels and that, and a number of other things. It's partly because of Brexit as well, because of the rules and getting it in, and obviously the pandemic slowed it down. For wood, it's because of all the forest fires we've been having in Sweden and North America. I could go on, but it's because we resource very few locally. That's why we're having the biggest problems, and prices are up and down like a yo-yo. Anyway, I was going to comment on Newton Farm Build. Really, we've got quite a few issues there, and I highlighted this before. The parking round about the school is causing absolute chaos because, for people who's getting in and out of school, and recently, again, I've had a number of emails saying that it's causing problems. I don't know if the contractors have got a plan to work with in terms of parking and stuff like that. So I'd like to understand that. But in a wider respect, I think Newton are actually short on Jarry's, cleaners and teachers. So Newton Farm's going through a very bad time at the moment. But the parking round about the site is a major issue.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I can take that away, and so I'll speak to the project team and make sure that's got a bit of focus on that, Councillor Brogan. Make sure that we're parking where appropriate, and providing as much space as possible within the grounds.
Yeah, I've been going through education, but I don't think I've been getting very far on it. So
I'll deal that directly with our own project team. Thanks.
Much appreciated.
That's very kind and much appreciated. So thank you, Mary. You're next.
It was just clarification. See the Hamilton area strategic schemes. Are we talking roads and here?
What page are you on, please, Mary? Just to direct everyone.
Right, hold on.
No, you're okay.
I don't know.
It helps me out as well because I'm flicking through the papers.
I'm doing it through CMIS and it's not letting me tell me.
Chair, I think that's in the roads programme.
Roads programme.
It talks about strategic schemes.
Yeah, so that is the roads. I thought it was.
Chair, there's no page numbers on the version I've got online, by the way.
Yeah,
is there not?
It's page 23, Hamilton Area Strategic Schemes. It's headed up A724 Glasgow Road, Blantyre. Is that the first one, Councillor Donnelly?
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, so sorry, Mary, do you want to ask the question again then?
It was just an observation that my inbox has been inundated with some of the streets that have been marked here for upgrading, or so I'm pleased to see that coming on stream, especially St Ninians. That's the elderly are in there, and they've complained quite a lot in the state of the road and the pavements coming out of the street. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for the feedback, Mary. Eric, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to say the page numbering thing. Yeah, on the online versions, they're unnumbered, but Carol did send us out an email with a PDF version that's got numbers on it. That's why I've got 2 copies in my thing, and it took me a while to remember why. And my computer's just decided it wants an update. Oh. Right.
Well, I've got that many emails. I haven't gotten to that one yet.
No, I'm just saying that it's just there.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, so any other questions for that section? No, right. Okay, so I'll just move that paper. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, I'll second.
Thanks very much, Mary. That's much appreciated. Okay. So we'll move on then to item 3B. So this is the capital budget monitoring. So this is your housing capital programme, and it's on pages 29 to 34. And I'll pass it over to Jackie, please.
Thanks, Chair. So again, same time period being covered in this report to the 8th of October. Section 4 of the report on page 29 gives a summary of the programme for the year, and we have a budget of just over £79.6 million. And section 4.4 reports that to the 8th of October, we've spent 37.4 of that. If I move to the appendices, on page 31, Appendix A, the programme is shown there and the funding for the programme is shown at the bottom of the table. The majority of the funding for the HRA capital programme comes from borrowing and also from the revenue account that deals with housing as well. And then on page 32, we have the graph that we normally report, shows how our actual spend is performing against our estimates that were made at the start of the year. Appendix B on page 33 starts to talk about the physical progress, and Derek can take us through that.
Okay, page 33, the executive summary for housing capital programme shows that there are 2 projects behind programme. And over the page, there's an explanation for both. On page 34, starts Bosfield Place, sheltered housing complex, the internal area upgrade. We've had tender issues. The tender issue has been delayed by my internal resourcing issues, staff basically, and Kirkriggs and Kirkconnell, sheltered housing. The external repairs, we've experienced delays in the supply chain with roofing tiles, which is an area that in the housing type projects we're having difficulties at the moment between both that and dry cement type products as well. So those are the 2 that are reported behind, Chair.
Right, okay, that's excellent. Thanks very much. Okay, I'm looking for questions and I can see Eric's got his hand up.
I don't want to go through all the same stuff as we just did before, but one question I should have asked, being as this is the Financial Scrutiny Forum, are these delays in procurement of materials being reflected in pricing and costs to us, because that's the way that a market economy normally adjusts to supply and demand problems. The price goes up. Is that going to put any pressure on our budgets for these projects going forward?
I can take that, Chair.
Thank you.
Eric, you're absolutely right. There will be price implications because of some of these things. And as Derek explained earlier, we are looking at each project obviously on its own merits. What has happened is that some projects are obviously delayed because of the issues in getting supplies. For other projects, there might be cost increases that we're managing within the overall programme. It is on a case-by-case basis, though. We do have a lot of projects that have kicked off on a fixed price basis, as Derek said, so they haven't been impacted by any increases in prices because of things. But it is something that we're very aware of, and I think in particular in the housing programme, there has been consideration of, well, if something is coming in very, very pricey, we'll maybe pause on that and continue doing other works where possible. So as I say, at the moment, it is very much on a case-by-case basis, because not all projects are reporting big increases in price.
That's sort of what I was worried about. For example, I mean, the two Clyde Bridge projects, the one that's been completed, thank you very much. I'm very grateful to see that done. We'd set aside we originally budgeted £3 million for each bridge. I think the one that's been completed came in at not far short of that, despite the fact it's about a third of the length of the other bridge, which makes me worry that the other one is going to be rather more expensive. And we could be talking £2 or £3 million more expensive than was originally forecast. And I'm just worried that, or I want reassurance really, that we've got some way of covering that and that we're not going to find ourselves cancelling projects because of increased costs or delaying them unduly because of rising costs.
Well, at the moment, the programme is set as the programme is set. We don't have another, contingent pot of money within this programme. So each project will be considered on its own individual merits.
Worrying me. It's worrying me. Okay, thank you.
Jackie, that was such a politician's answer.
Was it?
It sounded like it.
I know. So in May, basically look out for Jackie coming to a seat near you. No, that was great. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? Right, we're going to let Derek escape. Derek, before you escape, it's just to say thank you very much for all the hard work that you do during the week, and you help make this committee run, and we really appreciate everything that you do in the background, and we appreciate the fact that we know we ask you lots of hard questions, and anything you can't answer off the top of your head that you always go away and find out for us. So it's just to say thank you very much, and we greatly appreciate you. Okay.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Merry Christmas.
Thank
I know.
you.
Merry Christmas, Derek.
Thanks, Derek.
Cheers.
You're allowed to escape now.
Thank you.
Okay, right, so I'll move that paper then. So that was 3B. Can I have a seconder, please?
Second it.
Thank you very much, Eric. That's much appreciated. Okay, we'll move on to item number 4 then. So this is the revenue budget monitoring. So this is pages 35 to 46. And I'll hand over to Jackie. What I will say is, I know we're struggling sometimes with pages, but if you do know the page number that you're going to speak about, if you can say that, then that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, Jackie, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So we're on page number 35, and this is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report, and this has taken us again to the 8th of October. So I'll start at the bottom of page 35. As you know, when I present this report, we report on a COVID and non-COVID basis separately, just so that we can keep a distinction between, I suppose, core business and what is as a result of the pandemic. So firstly, we've got the core business, the position excluding COVID at section 4. And we're reporting there, just at the bottom of page 35, that for our core budgets, we're reporting an overspend of £146,000 as at the 8th of October. The majority of that, the vast majority of that, relates to social work resources. And again, it reflects children and families spend that we've reported on previously. We are expecting that that service will outturn at around about £500,000 overspent. We have done some work to make sure that we're identifying costs that have been as an impact of the pandemic, and we're reporting them under that particular funding source. Another couple of mentions in section 4, just to bring to your attention. At section 4.3, we talk about the early years expansion. We have money that's been provided by the government to fund early years expansion, and we are expecting an underspend this year, and that's what this paragraph is in relation to. That's around staff costs and food provision. We have had underspends in the year because of the time it's taken to fill new posts, as well as vacancies within posts that we already had. So at the moment, we're forecasting that will be around about £1.2 million. And what we'll do, as we've done in previous years, is propose to members through our exercises at the end of the year that gets placed in reserves, and we'll carry it forward so that we can complete our early years expansion going forward. At 4.4, we're highlighting the issue around utilities. Everyone will be aware of the price hike that we've seen in utilities over recent months. And this paragraph is just to acknowledge that. What we do as local authorities is purchase our energy via contracts that are procured via the Scottish Government. And we do, as a group, buy energy in advance. So this report's reporting that actually by the end of September, all of the energy that we need for this year has been purchased. And for next year, we have 86% of our electricity purchased and 83% of our gas. So that's a hedge against increasing prices going forward. That doesn't mean that we've bought energy without a price increase. There is price increases built into that. But if energy prices continue to increase, we do have a hedge against that increase. We do have some money that's in our corporate budget line this year for utilities that we haven't had to spend yet. So the plan is, if we don't require it this year, we'll set it aside in a reserve at the end of the year, and that'll contribute towards any increase in prices next year that we haven't budgeted for. So it's a plan, I suppose, to manage costs next year. So that was the non-COVID position. Section 5 takes us into the COVID world. And you'll recall from previous meetings, we do have funding for COVID, 59.6 million, of which some is for specific purposes, mainly education, and 32 million is for other COVID cost pressures. We are expecting around 18.6 million to be spent of that non-specific COVID funding this year, and we'll carry the rest into next year to cover costs that we expect next year too. Section 5.3 on page 36 talks about the position on COVID spend to the 8th of October. And there's a neat little table at the top of page 37 that summarises how that spend has moved from the last period that we reported. More interestingly, Appendix 3 actually gives full details of the COVID spend, and we'll cover that when we get into the appendices. From section 5.6, we have some narrative around social care. Very much the first two paragraphs there are what I've told you before around the fact that costs in relation to the pandemic for social care are getting picked up as part of what we call the mobilisation plan, and that's where Scottish Government are funding those costs for us. When we move into section 5.8, we're reporting the fact that the Scottish Government have recently announced an additional £300 million of funding. At the time of writing this report, we hadn't been notified of our share of those funds. We have now been notified of some of those funds. This money will go through our integrated joint board predominantly, if it's not going straight into health. As this is in relation to the IJB, it's appropriate that the IJB are the ones that are identifying how this will be spent. And the Chief Financial Officer for the IJB has committed to reporting back to the board to the next meeting around their financial position going forward. So that's what that paragraph is reporting. A bit of a risk is noted at 5.9 around the fact that we do have that comfort of the mobilisation plan this year and that funding that goes with it. But we are aware that some of the costs that we're incurring this year will recur into next year. And it's that challenge to make sure that the cost that we're incurring into next year, we have sufficient funding for. And that will be wrapped up as part of the work that the Chief Financial Officer is doing on the IJB budget next year. But that is a risk. So that's the main points to note in the report. If I move to the appendices, firstly on page 40, we have the detailed information around spend across resources and services. And you can see the budgets and the actual spends on that page. And then the next page gives similar information but broken down over types of spend, such as employee costs and property costs. And that's on page 41. When we move into page 42, we start to talk about COVID and the costs that we've incurred there. And there's a summary on page 42, which then leads in to Appendix 3 on page 43, which shows all of the elements of spend in relation to COVID for the year. And you'll be used to seeing that from previous reports. Appendix 4 on page 46, it covers our housing revenue account spend, and we're reporting a break-even position on our housing revenue account. That's due to the fact that the housing revenue account is self-funding, and any over or underspends within that fund are managed through their reserve, either a contribution to the reserve or bringing money out of their reserve. And that is that. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Jackie. Okay, so just bear with me 2 seconds. Okay, first up is Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, I have two questions really. One is something I can't get my head around exactly what you mean by this, but page 36, paragraph 4.4. We've bought 100% of our electricity for the current year.
Yeah.
And we've got 86% and 83% bought for next year. What I'm not really quite sure of is how is it. I don't even know how to explain it properly. But if we knew that we were going to use X number of units of electricity and we had a price of pence per unit, we could know exactly how much electricity we need for the year and we would have bought it. But we don't know how much electricity. We can predict it with some degree of accuracy. But one of the things that we will come on to in the next paper is we're going to look at the vast increases in utility bills for schools, particularly where we've got all the windows open and it's not even cold yet. Well, it's just become cold, but when this paper was written, it hadn't become cold yet. Those figures could run a little bit out of hand. So what I'm wondering is how much, how accurate is the idea that we've bought 100% of our electricity? Is it an unlimited amount at a given price that we've purchased, or is it a quantum that we've purchased at a given price, and there could be it could be an excess cost over and above that? And when we come to 86 and 83% next year, I just don't understand how you get a figure of 86 and 83%. Perhaps you could just sort of explain that to me a little bit. I've then got a COVID question, but I think one at a time is probably easier.
In terms of the energy, this is a centrally managed contract, so it's not something that we do at a council level. And you're right, there'll be estimates that have been made across the board on how much utilities we will need, gas and electricity, as a country for Scottish councils. It might even go wider than that. It might even include central government. I genuinely don't know that. So there will be estimates made and the deal done to fix a price for the energy that we need for this year. The same will be done for next year, again based on an estimate. And my understanding is that we don't commit to 100% for, we could do it for the next 5 years. But there has to be some kind of, I suppose, scope for maybe reducing costs. You don't want to fix in at a rate that's perhaps too high. So there'll be people that are a lot more aware and are cleverer than me around how to buy energy that are responsible for doing this. But that's where those percentages come from. And locking in that price, it doesn't mean that we're paying what we would have paid last year for energy. The companies will still be building in an element of an increase. It's just that if prices double, for example, next year, we'll not face that future increase in prices. We're locked into the price that we've agreed at the moment. Does that help?
No, not really. Unfortunately, I suspect you're reflecting the same lack of understanding that I have. The only difference is I'm worried about it and you seem to be less concerned about it. It's just, I just want to know, 86% of the total bill has been secured, 80% of the quantum of electricity that we're required has been secured, or what 86% of what?
It'll be of the estimate of the energy that's needed across Scottish councils. So if there was 100 units that Scottish councils used in the past, there will be an estimate of what we need going forward, and that will be what the 86 and 83% is based on. Now, that doesn't mean that once we get to, the 86% or the 100%, we can't get any energy. Not at all. I mean, it obviously can be variable, but I'm not concerned in terms of how the calculation's done. Probably what would worry me more is the fact that these costs are increasing. We know that, and we'll have to factor that into future budgets to reflect the fact that energy prices are increasing. They may well come down again, in which case we'll reflect that in our budget as well.
In which case, you'll be glad it's only 86% secured. No, all I'm worried about is the fact that it's not just the price of electricity that we have to worry about, but it's also the quantum of electricity or gas that we use, and that isn't secured. But if we have an unlimited quantity at a price per unit, then that's perhaps what's meant there. But anyway, I'll leave that one for now. I'll have to think about that. The other question I had was regarding the COVID non-specific funding. Quite often in the reports that we've seen over the last few months, there's been so-and-so, such and such has been incurred this little bit of money, but don't worry, we've got the non-specific COVID funding. And I'm just wondering how that is going, how long it's projected to last, and what idea you might have about when it runs out. What do we do with because it will eventually run out, and I think the COVID issues are not going to go away anytime soon. We might have thought 2 vaccines and we'd probably be clear of it, but it doesn't seem to be working that way. So I'm just wondering what security we have or what comfort we have going forward.
So section 5.1 of the report gives the figures that we have. So we have £32.2 million of non-specific COVID funding. And this report's reporting that we're estimating we'll spend 18 of that this year. Now, we're undertaking our probable outturn exercise at the moment, which is our deep dive into spend, and we'll report that early into the new year. So that £18 million might reduce, might go up, depending on our actual spend for the year. But our estimates are 18 million. So that would leave around £13 million for next year. And you're right, there will be costs that will recur into next year for specific things. We would hope that some of these costs start to reduce down as perhaps we adapt in different ways. Again, we probably would have been more comforted by that maybe 6 weeks ago, but now that we're seeing, a kind of new variants coming in and perhaps an increase in measures, we'll just have to, again, see how that pans out. But at the moment, we're not aware of any more funding that's coming in relation to COVID next year, for example. But we'll not know that for certain until we get our budget settlement, which will be next week. So we might get a feel there if there's any more monies coming for COVID, but we can't guarantee that. So if we can deal with this year from the money we've got, we'll hopefully be able to deal with next year with the money that we've got. And then if we have to build in more permanent funding requirements for ongoing COVID costs into future years' budgets, then that's what we'll have to do. But again, with all things pandemic, things can move, relatively, quickly. So this is very much a kind of watching brief, and it's something that we have to reflect in our budgets going forward if those costs still remain.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Walter, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't know if this will help Eric much or not, but I think the way the process works, certainly when I was doing my purchasing, when you were forward planning, you would do it on price breaks and also volume breaks. So it's not one price that we're committing to in the contract. It's probably several different prices depending on the number of volumes we used. And you never ever committed to 100% going forward, as Jackie said, so that you could try and bring a price down if competition was good. So I think it's more different prices at different volumes is what we're committing to, rather than one price for X amount.
I think that's more what I wanted to hear, actually, was how it works in a bit more detail. But I don't think we need to go into. I don't think I need to push that today. I think I've probably heard enough for today. And if I've got any more questions, I can do that offline.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for everybody that helped out with those answers there. What I'll do then is I'll move that paper. Can I have somebody that can second it, please?
Second it.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. Okay, so I'll just move on then to item number 5. So this is the revenue budget monitoring. So this is the detailed resource analysis that Lorraine is always kind enough to take us through, and that's pages 47 to 114. Lorraine, I'll just hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So the summary report sits on page 47 and 48, but the substantive detail then sits from page 49 onwards. So the first resource then is community resources, and in the normal way we've got the summary page there that shows you a bottom line position for the resource as at the end, 8th of October, of 2.468 million over, and that includes obviously substantial spend in terms of COVID-19. In terms of variances for community enterprise, the new ones that have come up this period, I would refer you first to page 51. There's probably about half a dozen for the resource, and they start at the top, page 51, within property costs. We have an overspend within rates, most of which is being attributed to COVID-19 and relates to charges for Peel Park Place in East Kilbride. So we're obviously using that facility. We've got Scottish Water, metered water charges, again an overspend there. Within facilities, streets, waste and ground, we've got charges for the Castle Hill transfer station. And within repairs and maintenance, an overspend there again within facilities, streets, waste and grounds, relating to an uphill of the CCTV system at the Castle Hill Transfer Waste Centre. At the bottom of that page, IT equipment contract, again within facilities, streets, waste and grounds, an overspend there relating to the purchase of replacement devices for the team within that service area. If I can take you over to page 52, we have an overspend within supplies and services, protective clothing, again within facilities, streets, waste and grounds, and that's mainly due to the requirement for new improved waterproof PPE for the operatives within the waste service. And at the very bottom of that page, a new variance there, again attributed to COVID, and that's again in relation to protective clothing, but this time for the COVID requirements. And I think that's all for that resource that's new this period. Yes, that's all we have.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine. So can I ask, is there any questions for this resource? Nope. Right, okay, that's fine. Lorraine, can we just move on to the next resource then? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Education then is the next resource. Now that starts on page 61 with the summary again for the resource, 538,000 of an overspend, and the vast majority of that being attributed to actual costs or additional costs in relation to COVID-19. In terms of any new variances for education, there aren't any this period. So the variances that you can see on page 62 to 64 are a continuation of what we've had before. There are a couple of substantial ones, just picking up on there within employee costs. We've got an underspend in relation to early years, and Jackie picked up on that earlier. We've got transport and plant overspends there at the bottom of page 62. Again, a variation on a theme, special education needs transport and pupil transport, mainstream transport, both showing an overspend there. We have an independent school placement overspend on page 63. That's again just a variation on what we've seen throughout the year so far. And that's probably just the highlights for that resource. Chair, thanks.
That's grand. Thanks very much as always, Lorraine. Eric, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, just a very quick one. I noticed in page 62, property costs, electricity and gas, I'm sorry to harp on about it, haven't gone up. There's not a new increase. Is that because we think things have stabilised a bit there, or is it the bill hasn't come in yet?
I think that the idea of a new variance coming in is where there's something that we haven't seen before in terms of a variance, but that's not to say that the variance period on period hasn't increased, Councillor, if that makes sense.
All right. Oh yeah. Well, I didn't check it back to the last paper, but I have in my mind very similar figures. So I'm just surprised it's not gone up even more. That was all. But no, if it hasn't, it hasn't, and that's a good thing.
Quick look at the trends.
I've just had a look, Lorraine. You're right, Councillor Holford. Last period it was also 125,000 over, and it's 125,000 over for electricity this period.
That's
so you're
what
right.
I thought.
It's probably to do with timing of bills that we haven't seen any increase in that, but that's not to say that it'll not come through.
I thought you were telling me there was good news. It's all stabilised, and we know where we are now.
Well, the gas one's going up slightly, but yes, electricity's. Exactly.
I just thought the quantum was similar. I couldn't remember the exact figures. I'm not brilliant, I'm afraid.
Well, what was good was you picked out something that was consistently over.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Well,
any more questions? Sorry, on you go, Eric. I talked over you. I apologise.
Sorry, I'm just saying we'll check it again next time and see where we're at.
Okay. Any other questions for that resource? Lorraine, you're getting off lightly. Just on we go, we'll move on.
Finance and corporate then starts on page 70. So again, the summary position shows you we have an overspend of 7.885 and 7.865 of that is being attributed to the additional costs of COVID. The variances for the finance and corporate resources start on page 72. There's probably again about half a dozen new ones. So the first one there is within employee costs, finance services transactions, showing an underspend there. And that's reflecting vacant posts within the benefits and revenue service and also within customer services centre. And those are partly offset by additional spend on overtime. Over the page, on page 73, we have within supplies and services, computer equipment purchase. So we've got 3 or 4 new variances here. Within finance services transactions again, within IT services and within admin, legal and licensing services, the overspends are all reflecting the current requirement for IT contract payments that we're experiencing this current year. If I can take you over to page 75, again, 2 new variances here within admin costs, an underspend within telephones and IT services, and that relates to lower than anticipated expenditure on the telephone function and is partially offset by an under recovery of income. IT services spend on behalf of the resources and then recharge back out. And within postage services there, midway down that column, an overspend of 32,000, most of which is being attributed to COVID in relation to the additional cost of processing low-income pandemic checks. And there's only one more, I think, she says confidently, on page 76 at the top of that page. Payments to other bodies there, we have an overspend within personnel, and that reflects additional expenditure within the Kickstart scheme to create jobs for young people, and again is offset by income, and this time it's coming from the Department of Work and Pensions. And that's all for Finance and Corporate. Thanks, Chair.
That's grand, thank you. Will we get any questions for this resource? Eric?
Sorry to keep going on, but just one other thing. On page 72, finance service transactions, and there's an underspend I'm talking about here, but due to vacant posts, are we struggling to fill those posts, or is this just a short-term glitch in things? I'm just wondering, I seem to have seen a problem a lot, again, across many of the things lately. There seems to be a growth in vacancies and a slowness in filling them.
I can take that. Eric, in particular, our transaction services, there are, numbers and numbers of people that work there. There's over 400 posts in there. And on an annual basis, we actually see underspends because they do have quite a high turnover of staff, just reflecting the nature of the work. Okay. We have had problems getting people into jobs generally. I'm not sure what the reasons are. We've tried to recruit ourselves in finance and struggled to get accountants to apply for jobs where previously we would have had multiple applicants. I can't tell you why that is. I don't know whether there's just people aren't particularly keen to move jobs just now. I'm not sure.
Very high employment and very low unemployment.
Perhaps
that's probably the biggest problem at the moment.
But this particular underspend is not something that isn't new for us. It's something we've seen before.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for this resource? No? Okay. Lorraine, we'll just move on.
Okay, thank you. Housing and Technical Resources then starts on page 85. And again, the summary shows you the position for the resource at period 7, which is 252,000 of an overspend there, all of which is attributed to additional costs of COVID pandemic. In terms of any variances, there aren't any new variances within Housing and Technical Resources at the moment. So again, I would just pick up on there being a number of sizable variances within the resource, which again are a variation on what we've seen already so far this year. So at the bottom of page 86, we've got a property cost overspend there, being attributed to COVID spend in terms of additional rent costs. Within property services, we've got additional service charges. And again, within property services, we've got an underspend there in relation to security. If you go over the page, you can see in supplies and services, we've got a very significant spend on property services materials, reflecting the level and type of work that they're carrying out this year, impacted again by the pandemic. But in terms of the position for the resource as a whole, we can then see the offset of that within the income side. And again, payments and contractors showing an underspend there. And again, the offset being on the income side. So you can see a sizable income under recovery shown on page 89. So nothing new to highlight there, just as I said earlier, a variation on what we've seen already so far this year. Thank you, Chair.
Okie doke. Any questions for this resource for Lorraine, please? No, right, okay, that's fine. Right, okay, we'll just move on, Lorraine.
Okay, thank you. So the HRA then, just a simple summary that we normally see for that function is on page 95, and it's just in line with what Jackie had highlighted previously when she talked you through that in the early report. No new variances again for the HRA, so we can see simply that we've got the underspend in employee costs, and we've got an offsetting under recovery in terms of our transfer to and from the balance sheet, which, as you know, is the balancing item within that function. So nothing else to highlight for the HRA. Thank you.
Okay, any questions on the resource? It's just like small anyway. No? Right, okay. Right, we'll just move on to the last one then, please, Lorraine. Okay,
thank you. So the social work position then is shown on page 101. The bottom line position for the resource at the 8th of October is an overspend of 1.347. 1.197 of that is within the COVID-19 banner. And we can also see on that page pressures within children and families, which Jackie touched on earlier. The variance explanations start on page 102. There are probably 4 or 5 new ones, and they start on page 104. So within supplies and services, we have food purchases within contract service. We have an overspend there, 32,000 of that being attributed to COVID, and that's in relation to the provision of staff meals in care homes to avoid outside contamination, losing my pair of speech. Over the page on page 105, within payments to other bodies, within children and families, we have an underspend there of 153,000, and that's in relation to the timing of recruitment of funded posts. And within adults and older people, 94,000 of an overspend there, and that relates to the Council's contribution towards the cost of the data sharing partnership that we have with NHS Lanarkshire. If I can take you over to page 107, we have a new variance there at the top of that page within payments to contractors, and that's within the respite service. Again, being attributed to COVID-19, and that's additional costs in relation to respite provided to meet the child's needs during the pandemic. So that's reflecting additional demand. And then partway down, page 108, within adults and older people, in terms of income, we have an under recovery of income, which is offsetting an underspend in relation to hospital social workers, and that's within the employee costs side of things. So it's an offsetting variance there, and that's all for social work. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, got any questions for that resource? No. Right, okay. Okay, well, I'll just move this paper then. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second it.
Thank you very much, Walter. Okay, we don't have any other urgent business, but what I did want to say, because I've remembered it, you lucky people, I wanted to give a special thanks to Carol for keeping us all sane and looking after us and making sure the meetings run properly. And I know Gillian's in the background with the cast general member, making sure that all works. So a thank you to them too. Jackie, I really appreciate everything you do with the papers to break it down, especially for the COVID spend. I know it's extra work you've had during the pandemic, but it does make it nice and clear, and it does then actually give us an opportunity to go through everything easier to then look for the questions that we actually want to ask you so that we can do our jobs properly on this forum, of which Eric wouldn't have the same amount of questions he had to ask if you didn't make the paperwork so clear and easy for us to actually ask you questions. So it's actually just because you're so good at your job that he gets to do that. So thank you very much. And Lorraine, thank you for always breaking down the detailed spend and actually catching us before we fall, because you do lay it out on a plate for us for what questions we should actually be asking you as elected members. And I appreciate the fact that you make that so nice and clear for us as well, because I think it's really good, because it helps us go through what we should be doing, and it makes us really have a really good think about what sort of questions that we should be asking, because it's not always the easiest thing to do as elected members, to go through the lines of a paper to actually find out what bits that we should actually be asking about, because you're all very clever as officers. So I just wanted to say thank you. And I also, it would be remiss if I didn't also thank the BSL interpreters that come along to these meetings to help. And hopefully we didn't speak too fast, and hopefully we did remember the majority of times to say the page numbers. And for all the times we didn't, I'll just apologise and say we're just going to have to work harder and do that so that we make sure we're as inclusive as possible. And I just want to say thank you to all the elected members on this call, because even though it's a hard committee, because you really need to get into the bowels of it to look and see what it is that we need to do to make sure that we're all doing a proper job. It's actually a very enjoyable committee, because everybody's so nice that's on it, and they're very respectful. And I think it's a credit to you all for the fact that as political parties, we all want to make sure that there's actual proper scrutiny done, which is quite right. But I think you do it in such a nice way that I very much appreciate you all. So thank you, because you make my job easy. And the other thing I just want to say was, obviously this is our last meeting before Christmas, so I hope you all have a wonderful time with friends, families, and whatever else that you're going to do, and have a lovely Christmas and a lovely New Year. So I just want to say thank you and just have a lovely time. And I'm no doubt I'll see an awareness session or something like that. But for today, anyway, thank you. Okay.
And thank you to you, Chair.
Ho, ho, ho.
Ho, ho, ho.
Oh, and remember the 10th is Christmas Jumper Day. So I'll expect to see you all online at the awareness session with that. And I nearly forgot to say, Carol, can you stop recording the meeting, please?